So how many of you, or have any of you, been following this um, practice month with, yeah, a number of people have. Okay. Good. So it's coming to an end here in another couple of days. Um, and I'm going to give you a chance to react from your perspective to your experiences, how it's been over the month. But I want to talk about it a little today because of a question that arose in Dyson this week. That's an important one, and going to start out with a koan, and this koan is called "Master Ma is Unwell," and incidentally, um, this koan, um, when you Google it, you get a talk that was given at Treetop Zen Center in 2009. And I'm pretty sure this was trying to think when Steph died, but this would have been just shortly before he died, I believe. Yes, the last year of his life, because it looks like it doesn't attribute an author, um, but it wasn't me, and it doesn't look like Margaret's style. It's more Steph's. So it's a really nice talk, and goes far more into the understanding of the koan and into the understanding of Master Ma, who he was, and his life. I'm just touching on it very peripherally. But we've talked about Ma before. He pops up because he was a really prominent teacher in the Tang Dynasty, and a number of really other prominent teachers that were his students that we know and we see often. Pai Chang, who's Hakujo's fox that so many of you know and love and enjoyed memorizing, and Nan Chuan, the notorious cat killer. So, a number of really prominent teachers descended from Matsu, who was supposedly a huge man, 7 feet tall, which is fairly unusual in China, especially back then. And he had there been an NBA, he might well have come over here and played, but that being none, he instead of making 137 million, he sat in his little monastery. But this koan, all right, I'm going to read you the koan now. I'll stop with that nonsense. Very simple little koan. Great Master Ma was unwell. The temple superintendent asked him, "Teacher, how has your venerable health been in recent days?" The great master said, "Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha." I will read it again. Great Master Ma was unwell. The temple superintendent asked him, "Teacher, how has your venerable health been in recent days?" Great Master said, "Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha." Another piece of background is that this dialogue takes place only a short while before Ma died. So he was really on his deathbed at this point when he has this little dialogue with the superintendent. So what's he saying, and why did I pick this one to relate to the experience of excuse me, the four qualities that you, those of you who did that exercise, sat with for this month. what I see Matsu is saying here and pointing to here is just this, just that, just this, just that. What I see him saying is, I am how I am. Some days sun-faced Buddha, some days moon-faced Buddha. You know, some days I'm happy, some days I'm sad, some days I'm sick, some days I'm well. But what Ma, that's true of all of us. But what Ma is doing that's different is he is not attaching to any of those. He is allowing those to come and go, to be as they are, without judging them, without clinging to them, without fixing them. He's acknowledging that everything is in flux constantly in our lives, constantly in flux. And from a Zen perspective, that's where we get in trouble, is when we just don't allow that flux to happen. When we resist, when we cling, when we are not able to just allow our lives to flow however they do. Inevitably, there are things that we like, there are things that we don't like. There are days that we're happy, there are days that we're sad. Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. But the Buddha aspect is the not attaching, the not clinging, the not pushing away, but just allowing, being deeply immersed in our lives, regardless of what appears. Things we like, things we don't like, right? Things we don't like. So why am I bringing that up in the context of these four qualities? Those, for those that don't know or don't remember, that a Tibetan teacher was offering four teaching and practice on four different qualities, right? So there was compassion, and there was equanimity, and loving kindness, right? And what's the fourth one that's escaping me?
Joy.
Joy. Thank you. Thank you. And somebody asked me this week, was kind of like, well, why aren't we paying attention to that in Zen? Which I thought is a really good question. Why is it a Tibetan teacher teaching on these things and not a Zen teacher teaching on these things? And the answer, quite simply, is that from a Zen perspective, this is very dangerous water to be getting into, because it's only a very short step from saying, I'm going to practice equanimity, for as an example, to I'm attached to equanimity. I'm forming an attachment to it, right? Most of the time, we're not going around sort of measuring our equanimity. But if we're engaged in a practice of equanimity, it's really tempting to say, oh, no, how much equanimity do I have today? Am I really calm, or am I like, a little bit perturbed, or what's going on here? And all of a sudden, we are watching ourselves, we are judging ourselves, we are measuring ourselves, which we may not have been doing previously before somebody said, go practice equanimity. Same with joy, right? One of the things it talks about, I think it's the most recent one, is cultivating joy. Well, joy is wonderful. We all want to be joyful. But what about all those times that we're not joyful? Is something lacking? Is something wrong? Do we need to scramble to get the joy back? Or is it just sun faced Buddha, moon faced Buddha? And Zen would say the latter, that even attachments to so called good things are attachments. And when those things fade or when those things go away, we have pain and suffering. So that's why, as I see it, Zen doesn't talk about those qualities to any significant extent, or maybe at all, because they can so easily become a new occasion for us to cling, to judge, to measure, right? And all of those things. I'm a really good person because I have a lot of equanimity. I'm a really bad person because I lost my equanimity today. All kinds of self-judgment, all kinds of attempts to attain, right? In a sense, it's saying implicitly that what we are right now is not enough, is not okay. And what Zen would say is whatever we are right now is okay. We don't need to attain anything. We don't need to seek anything. We don't need to be anyone. We just need to live right here, right now. Now, I think the fact is that there's really, excuse me, that neither of these approaches is absolutely correct. Can we and the world benefit if we cultivate love and kindness, compassion? I think the answer is yes. And yet at the same time, can we become attached to trying to be compassionate? The answer is also yes. So I think what we need to be doing, in a sense, is just constantly balancing, going off the balance a little and then coming back to the balance a little, kind of reorienting ourselves, not going off into attachment and clinging and resistance, and yet also having some hesitating on the word because I don't want to trap myself. Maybe I'll use the word aspiration. See, I've already trapped myself, but that's a whole interesting sort of secondary question. It's kind of hard to live without any aspiration. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have some aspiration, right? You wouldn't sit zazen if you didn't have some aspiration. It might not be a lofty aspiration. It might not be to attain Buddhahood or deep realization, but there's probably some aspiration to be a better person, to be a little less angry, or whatever the things are, the qualities are that you want to improve with yourself is probably part of why you're here. If you didn't have any aspiration, I would venture that you would be here. There's better things you can do on a Sunday morning. I hate to break that to you. So at some level, we were all aspiring. Even if we're aspiring to not aspire, right? That's the whole, you know, ideally we should practice without intention. Ideally, practice should be its own end, right? Not to get something, to attain something, to get somewhere, but we're practicing just because we practice. Dogen said we practice because we're already enlightened, which is a really interesting idea. We practice because we're already enlightened. What does that mean? Well, at least as partly as I see it, we're practicing because we have that enlightened nature that's looking to express itself. It's looking to express itself. And we understand that we've sort of got to get out the way, got to stop blocking it, blocking the light, and let it free. And that, again, Tibetans have a little bit different thing. That they have, the Tibetans have a word, it's not just Tibetans, but in other types of Buddhism, they have a word bodhicitta, bodhicitta. And that's the desire to awaken. And it's therefore the thing that they see as bringing us to practice. And it's very much in my mind like what Dogen is talking about. You know, it's our inherent nature looking to express itself. Again, a slippery slope. Can we do that without attaching to that expression, without patting ourselves on the back? If we have good practice on a particular day, if we're a little bit nicer as human beings, you know, can this whole thing become another ornamentation for our egos? So that's the trap. That's the thing that we're constantly working with and around. It's this, you know, how do we practice? How do we go? I was going to say go forward in our practice, but that's, again, I'm in one of my semantic traps. But how do we practice without attaching to practice? How do we practice without attaching to outcomes? How do we practice without attaching to the process? You know, when I sat at a large practice center, one of the things that was very clear was that there was great attachment among the students to sitting well. And who could sit the longest without moving, and who could tolerate the most pain. And it was clear that many students, including ones that would be sort of considered to be senior in the Sangha, attached to this. It was like a competitive thing, you know. I'm going to sit more still and longer than you are, because that shows how good my practice is. Right, so we can even become attached to just the physical aspects of the process, and we can mistake that for our practice. our practice is not sitting still, even though when we practice, we sit still, or relatively so. So we constantly mistake the finger for the moon, right? So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to kind of reflect, if you would like to, on your experiences doing these four practices, these four practice weeks, but sort of in in the context of, where does it fit? Where does it fit in our practice lives? Is it something that can and should be part of our regular practice? Is it a slope that's too slippery? Is it another place that the ego is grasping for and using to avoid sun face Buddha and moon face Buddha? And the context of this point, I think, is really important also, and it goes again to the kind of the perspective of Zen. In Tibetan Buddhism and some other forms of Buddhism as well, they do a great deal of preparation for dying. Now, therefore, someone might justifiably ask the question, well, how come we're not preparing for dying in Zen the same way that a Tibetan practitioner would be? And the answer is the same answer: sun face Buddha, moon face Buddha. Someday we'll all be Matsu on his deathbed, right? And if we can learn to live, whatever the weather is, whatever the light is, whatever then dying is no greater problem than anything else. It's just an extension of everything else. Our entire practice life is preparing to die. Our entire practice life is preparing to live. Right? We don't need to carve out a separate practice. Now, someday when I'm wandering completely lost and confused through the bardos, I'll look back and say, "Oh, geez, I wish I had practiced." But at least from a Zen perspective, learning to die is learning to live. It's the same thing. It's learning to let go. It's learning to be and to let be. Thank you. Okay, so please feel free, any of you that did the practice month, share any thoughts, observations, questions, whatever you'd like.
Hey, Peter, Jim. Um, so I think this is one of your most poignant talks because um, I think when we do Daisen together, I think I've mentioned that I like to meditate in nature, walking in nature. I live in a place with a lot of wildlife. And the talk is important, and that the past month has been important because the other day when I was walking in nature with my dog, I happened to see a fox, a gray fox, come out of the woods, and in its mouth it had a rabbit. So for anybody who lives close to the woods, and I know what you do, when you hear a rabbit squealing for its life, it is a terrifying noise. I mean, it almost sounds like a baby crying. Your initial reaction is, my initial reaction was that, like, I got to save it, right? Um, I was thinking, like, do I chase it with a stick? Do I let the dog loose, try to get it free? Like, but I think that that experience speaks to what you're talking about today. Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. In New Hampshire, when I was growing up as a kid, you use the expression, it is what it is. Um, because if you attach to that experience, right, you could fail to see that if you shake the rabbit loose, like the fox and the kits could die, right? And that's just the cycle of nature. And so I think your talk speaks to the same thing, when it goes back, not specifically with the last 4 weeks, but the concept of eco dharma that we had talked about. Um, that koan relates directly to that experience that I had outside, right, with the fox and the rabbit. There should actually be a koan, the fox and the rabbit. I don't know if you want to write it. I think it'd be great, but it really, that whole experience, that there's no amount of writing, reading, drawing, sitting in the practice that could have hit home that koan more than having that experience in nature. So I think the experience has been great, but I think it also speaks to the idea that when you attach to compassion, what are you compassionate for? Are you compassionate for the fox? Are you compassionate for the rabbit? And it's difficult to bifurcate that. And so sometimes you just have to sit with it and let it go, which is what I did. So that was my experience with it. I just wanted to share.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, some days you're the fox, some days you're the rabbit, right? It is part of the nature of things, and understanding that, and to some extent allowing it to be, like you say, that's sort of the conclusion that you came to, allowing it to be. It's what was happening. It was nature playing itself out, and that's true. When we're talking about dying, right? We don't get a choice, a vote, ultimately, right? And so at some point, what will be will be. And so an important part of practice is just that, and then you go to compassion. Compassion is for everything. I think if we're able to really be compassionate, it's not either or, it's all of. Compassion for the fox, for the kit, for the rabbit, right? For us having to witness something that's uncomfortable and painful like that. Compassion for the whole ball of wax. In the human examples is where it gets a little tougher, having compassion for Ukrainians and for Putin, having compassion for Israelis and for Gazans, right? We're actually constantly facing these kinds of dilemmas. Compassion doesn't make the kinds of distinctions that we typically make. They're right and they're wrong. Oh, the fox was right, and the rabbit was wrong, or vice versa, right? We wouldn't say that. They were simply expressing their natures, and so we make distinctions that are not often not useful. And the same thing, I don't know about most of you, but I am just, I think I probably said this before, I'm just struggling with this whole thing in Gaza. And I'm so disturbed by it. And I can see wrong on both sides. I can see right on both sides. And I can't tease those out. I can't say, this, yeah, but this one is this and this one is that. No, I kind of start going down that road and I say, oh my God, this is such a mess. There's no way I can possibly parse this out and make sense of it. It's such horror on all sides, and so we're constantly being tempted with a choice of choosing the fox or choosing the rabbit. And yet, quite often that's a false dichotomy and a false choice. And our compassion needs to expand to the whole thing.
Peter, I'm going to try to make sense of this. It makes sense in my mind. It may not when I speak, but um, developing a greater loving kindness, compassion towards others, and more specifically, tolerance of others in areas specifically as it relates to work ethic or mannerisms in which um, I can find odd or offensive. And in a time past, people would indicate that what I see in someone else is something that I see in myself that I dislike or like. And to that, I've always kind of wanted to have the reply of horseshit. There's nothing I see in that I approve of. And then I ran across uh, a concept that basically indicated that when I see an action that I would typically define as not appropriate, it is because I am not willing to sacrifice my personal identity, that a core value inside of me is so tight, so strong that the value system, that the belief system, that the principle, the work ethic is there and it defines me. And therefore, if I allow them, then I have to sacrifice me. Now that made sense because I'm not always willing to do that, nor am I actually I don't even know if it's possible to let go of that core principle. But if I'm going to enter on this path of non-self, no boundary to me in the universe, then in reality, this tightness of principles and what I deem right and wrong really has to be relaxed and let go. And again, can I do it? Am I willing to do it? Those are, perplexing. So the only thing that I can come up with at the moment is that, again, while I sit, is simply to connect to the breath. And in essence, create a space around my heart to where there is room for it to grow or manipulate. And then organically, it's either going to change or it's not going to change. Hell, like the old man, you say I ain't going to be doing nothing else while I'm doing that. So I may as well go ahead and get on with it. So whether or not it actually does occur is, I guess, in essence, irrelevant, because as long as I'm attempting to put space around the heart, then it will either do it or it won't do it. But sacrificing my personal identity or something that I would consider a core value, initially, that's a pretty steep mountain. And as I look at equanimity on both sides, yes, right, wrong, right, black, white, I don't have the answer to all of those. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So your point is so important. It's so well taken too. I mean, what does it mean to give up these things? What does it mean to have compassion? Well, first of all, I would say, the compassion doesn't take sides. It doesn't mean that we may not have a side. And that's a little complicated. As we were talking, I was thinking about this thing, this execution in Arkansas. Did people follow that in the last few days? Horrible, horrific situation. And yet look what you got on one side. You got on this man who did a horrible murder, a horrible crime, which is what got him there. And the state of Arkansas also doing something horrible that I consider murder, frankly. I'm personally against the death penalty. So how do you balance those two things? And the simple black and white, right or wrong, doesn't apply in so many of these situations. The truth is dialectical and it's complex, and it's, what this man did was horrible. What the state of Arkansas did was horrible. Can those, it took him a half hour to die. We had a better system when we hung people or shot them or whatever, and this was supposedly our humane solution. Excuse me. These things are not simple, and they're not black and white, and they should challenge us. And at the end of the day, we may just say, well, I can't go along with that, whatever that is. We all also have the places we're not, for whatever reason, willing, ready, able to go, and maybe not, and maybe completely appropriately. Particularly when we get into these moral dilemmas, that they're very complex. So again, all that, but as far as I see it, the way that the compassion operates, the compassion asks us to look at the whole thing, to not make a snap judgment, to not make a rote judgment, we've always done this way, so we're going to keep doing it this way. No, we're looking at the situation anew. We're looking at it without, as best we can, without prejudicial viewpoints, in the most open way that we can. We're back to the Zen peacemakers again, right? Not knowing and then bearing witness. And coming from that perspective, trying to hold the space of compassion to the greatest extent that we can. Again, we're in a real world that it is almost never simple. It's almost never black and white. And at the end of the day, can two people with equally good intentions, with equally sincere efforts, come up with different conclusions? Absolutely. So that's the other thing, is this idea, we have to kind of relinquish the idea that there is a right answer. There may be many answers that are right. And sometimes maybe we're choosing the lesser evil, because there's no way out of the situation that isn't going to do some harm. The fox and the rabbit. There was going to be harm. No matter what Jim did, there was going to be harm. you could choose whether it would be the fox or whether it would be the rabbit or whether it would be both of them, but something was going to suffer. Right. And that's often the case. That's where this stuff gets really hard. That's where this stuff really gets hard. And it's easy. It's easy for somebody like me to sit here and say, well, I'm opposed to all war and all violence, which I am. But then if I'm the person who's got the responsibility for keeping those people on the kibbutzes alive, or for keeping those people in the Gaza cities and settlements alive, is sort of doing nothing one of my options? Is harming nobody one of my options? So I sort of get to be the armchair philosopher, but when we come up against these things in real life, they're never easy. I mean, even the right thing can be done in a way that's wrong, right? I mean, that's how I see the situation with Hamas, and I probably shouldn't wade out too far here, but we'll get into. But it is wanting to have freedom for the Gazan people a good thing? In my mind, it is. Is going around killing people to get that a good thing? No, But the situations are so complex. In an odd way, I think that sometimes, maybe ironically, some of the people that are leaders that are making these decisions can't be too ethical, because they'd spend their lives making the decisions instead of taking the actions. And sometimes action is necessary. And I personally thank God that I'm not the one who has to make that decision.
Um, not to get into that discussion about Gaza and Hamas, it is horrendous. But back to the fox and the rabbit. One thing we know is that beyond the individual, the fox and the rabbit, and what goes on with them, is that populations are healthier when you have strong predators. These systems work better with a strong predator. It's not just about the individuals. It's beyond that. These kind of population actions that happen. And I find that with loving kindness, when I practice loving kindness and compassion, it helps me move away from that sense of, me as an individual and how things affect me and how I am, and where I stand on things and what my opinion is, that it helps me to be more empathetic and think about other people in a broader sense. And in a sense, connect. I think that is why I'm here in Zen, is because it helps me connect with everybody and be compassionate and feel the oneness of all of us. And it is always very complex. And it's not, you pull one lever, it's not even you pull one lever and a million other things can happen. So I think these analogies are really helpful. And when it comes to Hamas and Gaza, I don't know. Obviously none of us have the answers. And yes, it is very complex. And I think all I can do is stand in compassion and hope that they find a way to peace, even though I know hope isn't the best thing to hold out. But what else is there at this point? So thanks.
Thank you. And there's this movie, what's it called? Like Israelism, something. Maybe I haven't got right about it. Anyway, it's about the sort of pro-Israel jingoism that's been for years sort of systematically fed to American Jews to kind of create, a sort of pro-Israel attitude under all circumstances. It's an interesting movie. But the reason I mention it is not that. But in the movie, they interview a Gazan man, someone who was fairly senior in the community. And he talks how he had been to Bernie Glassman's Bearing Witness retreat. So that's the other thing. It's like, we sometimes feel like, oh, we've got no ability to influence these global events and these terrible things. But here it is. Bernie created this thing, and this man in Gaza went to it, and it impacted his relationship to his community there and to the Israelis. Now he's just one man, but does say to me that, these things are also not hopeless.
And Peter, I just would say also that when we are doing our practice and we're working on loving kindness and all various aspects, when we open our heart and we go to our heart and we see things through our heart, whether it's Gaza, whether it was, the nuke scares in the 70s, whether it was whatever the hell it is, there's always something, right? It gives us a chance in that space in our heart to experience how that feels. And when we make those choices or imagine in our head that we're making those choices, it allows us to sort of practice so that, yes, maybe there will be a time when you're called on to do these things, to make those tough choices. And by then, hopefully you've gotten to know your true nature enough that you can do so from a place of sort of being the genuine you. It's part of our practice is seeing things clearly, things that are not pleasant and they're not perfect, but we experience them nonetheless. And that experience is what we take forward with us as our human experience. So yeah, just rabbits and foxes and everything is practice, grist for the mill, right?
It is. Well, and stepping back just a step further, I mean, what's I think is wonderful and essential is that we're even having this conversation, that we're even willing to look at and talk about these difficult things. And that's more rare than we realize, I think. And especially to look at them and talk at them from trying to hold, however imperfectly, a compassionate perspective, an open perspective, and not immediately falling into one side or the other, not immediately falling into anger or hatred or fear or, willing to be open, willing to explore, willing to talk, willing to examine. To me, those are incredible capacities that we don't use as nearly as much as we should as human beings. It's so much easier to fall into one side or the other. Or even better, just shut down the whole thing. Right? Why should I spend my Sunday morning worrying about what's happening in the Middle East or Ukraine or down the street. It's not neither easy nor pleasant to wrestle with these things. And yet, I think that if we're taking the Dharma seriously, then we sort of, we need to face what's unpleasant, what's uncomfortable, and and so on. And we can't just wash it away or ignore it, even when there's nothing we can do about it. Because there's always something we can do about it.
Peter, I've been following. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I've been following the meditation month, as it were. I'm a little bit behind just because of time, but for me, I see the equanimity, the compassion, the loving kindness, and the joy as sort of tools to sort of explore and keep in the back of my mind. So it's kind of an addition and something to, when there is a difficult situation, when there is something, at work, for example, kind of along the lines of what Daniel said of, I had a very difficult situation that was going on, and it just so happened I had sat with, with the meditation month, I had sat that morning and kind of, it was sort of in the back of my mind, fresh. And I was, hot, and I was all of those things, but I took a moment and I tried to kind of step back and say, okay, with what I've just said with this morning, can I just try to look at this a little bit different, a little different perspective? What would it look like? And it took me a minute, and I just tried it. I just said, all right, and it wasn't perfect. It'll never, I wasn't quite there yet, but it just allowed me to explore that, to try it. And it felt like I wasn't resisting the situation as much, like I was a little bit open. And so to me, while not, of course, perfect, and I have some way to go, and I'm not necessarily using it as a goal. Okay, I want to be more compassionate. Just the fact that I recognized it, that I had that, oh, hey, I can use this. This can help me. I think it's a really great opportunity, because yes, we are who we are, and we have our nature, and we're trying to express that. And I think some of these things that we are exposed to through other I don't know, styles, as it were, we can use those to enhance and to help us along. So it's I think the use of or exposure to other I don't know, ways of practicing, as it were, it's actually really, really helpful, without a goal, without, I'm going to be this way going forward, but just say, hey, that's great. It helped me, at least in this situation. It was kind of cool, a little progress. So that's how I've seen this last month.
Yes, thank you. And I just think you're making an important point, and it goes to the larger point of the fact that there may be some particular Zen way of practicing, Zen way of thinking, doesn't mean that you've got to do that or that it's the best. I sort of feel obligated to point that out, but I'm not necessarily advocating for it. But once in a while, I feel like I've got to attend to the Dharma. And
The only thing I'd like to kind of piggyback off of RJ there is the time periods that I'm actually able to back away and take a more holistic view, in particularly in work environments, is the level of tension diminishes. It is much more receptive uh, during those time periods where a pause is actually taking place. And um, good, bad, or indifferent, I mean, I can create tension in a room in a heartbeat. Uh, it's just my nature. But I can also back away from that, and a hell of a lot more shit gets done. So, yes, I agree. There is having multiple avenues of looking at the situation is wonderful. Making decisions are not difficult. I can split second. Give me 30 things to look at. I'll pick one. Um, but slowing down to see all 30 is imperative. So thank you, RJ.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I didn't do this month of practice. But that path, or whatever you want to call it, that was kind of the beginning for me when I started searching, looking for a meditation practice. And of course, the driving force for me in that was that seeking through prayer and meditation is the 11th step in a 12-step program. And I started meditating really out of desperation. Like, I've got to do everything that it says so that I will be okay and that I'll be sober and not pick up a drink. And I want to say that I had years of, I'd go to the Kripalu Center in Massachusetts and do week-long silent retreats. I did yoga and I read Thich Nhat Hanh and all that. And really, it saved my life. I feel like that, I really do. I feel like the practices that I became involved in, that I would get relief. And that was what I needed then. And I got tools. But after a time, when I sat for my first retreat at Treetop, which was, I guess, maybe 15 years ago, and I left that behind. And I sat in that first retreat and I felt like, just this. And and so all of it has gone into you know my experience in life and where I am today. So I see it as a use for all of us, no matter what that is. And I just found this and here I am. So thank you.
Thank you. Are we at a good point to wind up? Okay.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Everyone, thank you and have a good day and a good week.
Thank you again.